are listening to Conscious Fever, hosted by Carl Price.
Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you are entitled to.
Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've been waiting for. So listen responsibly.
It's the best of the best. It's the one and only DJ Ice, Louisville's coldest DJ.
Hey, good evening. Welcome to Conscious Fever here on Ice Entertainment Television and Conscious Fever Radio. I am Carl Price, your host. I am here tonight. I have a guest here with me tonight, and we're going to talk about the Louisville Metro Police Department and the United States Department of Justice. Many of you know that the United States Department of Justice, many of you know by now that the United States Department of Justice came to Louisville and finalized this report and reported that Louisville is probably one of the worst police cities in America for black people. Period. Am I saying that right? Mr. Mullins, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I don't know. But in any case, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to get my buddy Paul Mullins here, and we're going to try to break down this report and talk about some things, some of the most ridiculous things that I have ever heard, even as my 25 years as a prosecutor. So I'm going to set Paul Mullins up, and right after he gets set up, we're going to come right back. We're going to talk about this report. Some of the stuff that's in this report, you may not believe. This is as I indicated, this is a report that was put out by the United States Department of Justice, and they titled this report, and you can see it there on the screen, Investigation of the Louisville Metro Police Department and Louisville Metro Government. Right after this quick takeaway, I'm going to be right back with Paul Mullins. Don't go anywhere.
It's the best of the best. It's the one and only.
You can't handle the truth.
You are listening to Conscious Fever, hosted by Carl Price.
Now check it out.
I have wept and I have fallen. Don't you worry about me. 'Cause I stood up, yes, I have grown. The pain has set me free. And like a broken record in my head.
Welcome back to Conscious Fever, hosted by Carl Price.
All right, welcome back to Conscious Fever on Ice Entertainment Television, Conscious Fever Radio. I'm Carl Price, your host. Again, thanks for joining me. We're on a little bit early tonight, and I hope y'all don't mind that. You can go back and look at it because my guest probably has a booty call. So he's going to have to get out of here. I know. You don't want me to say that, but I'm just going to call it. Well, I know I'll probably put you in danger, but because if you don't have a booty call with the one that she thinks she should have, okay, he's kicking my leg, so I got to stop talking. Anyway, I'm Carl Price. This is Conscious Fever on Ice Entertainment Television, Conscious Fever Radio. Paul Mullins is joining me tonight. How you doing, Mr. Mullins?
I'm good, Carl.
Okay, good.
Nice introduction there. I didn't like that, but
what do you mean you didn't like the introduction, man? It was
not a good one.
We were just talking about some stuff, man.
All right,
but I know you want to get right into before we get right into it. You want to get right into the Justice Department's report, and I have screwed up. Okay, so you want to get right into the Justice Department. Okay, there we go. You want to get right into the Justice Department's report. So let's get right into this report. The Department of Justice report on Lmpd. My. What are we talking about here, Paul? I'm going to let you start off because this was something that literally blew my mind, man.
So, Carl, if you want to fast forward to the summary real quick on that, can you scroll that right there?
I can't scroll that. You want
Scroll
to
to the summary right there. Go back. Right there. Go back one more.
one more?
Right, the summary. So what this summary says is that LMPD, a lot of people already know this, they use excessive force. I don't think that's a surprise. But what they also say that is not surprise is that LMP also has executed and sought invalid search warrants that didn't have probable cause. That even when they executed them invalidly. And the main hitter that everyone needs to know is that they found that LMPD discriminates against black people. I think some of us already knew that, but they found it as an official part of their investigation that they discriminate against black people. And they also violate people's right to, at times, express their First Amendment rights. People know that sometimes officers on the streets, instead of arresting you for something you actually did that might rise to the level of a crime, that oftentimes people have claimed that officers have jumped on them because of something they have said, where they weren't violating any laws, where they simply question the officer's authority or question why they are being arrested or question why they're doing the things they do, that sometimes the officers get angry, upset, slam them to the ground, and pretty much use excessive force. Well, this report validates everyone who has made those claims because they give details and instances of where that has actually happened.
Right. Which is really amazing. But I know you looked at the report. I looked at the report. And one of the interesting things about the report is that it seems like in this report, Paul, that accountability just shouldn't stop or start with LMPD. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a 90-page report. 80 pages are detailing the investigation. The last 10 pages pretty much detail, or 8 or 9 pages, detail what LMPD should do. And you can talk about the agreement that was made, but what it basically finds is that LMPD operates the way they do because of a lack of oversight. Now, there's a whole bunch of points that they make, but when you read this as a whole, it basically demonstrates that the lack of oversight, and it's not just from the officers' supervisors, but it also kind of hints at judicial accountability and prosecutorial accountability for not having oversight of these officers, which has not caused or created, but lent to their ability to operate in this what they describe as an illegal manner.
Well, talk about the portion in this report, because first of all, let me just say this. I know anybody who has read the report, or anybody who has, not really people who have read the report, but anybody who has heard about the report, you've heard snippets of it. It's a 86, 90-page report, and you really need to dig into the details of this report to see how, I don't know what the word is, to see how horrible it is and how horrible the conduct is. But the summary of the report, if all you get is the summary of the report, you may say, wow, okay, so the police department in Louisville is discriminating against black folks and singling out black people. Can I say colored people?
No.
Okay, I can't say colored people, but they're singling out people other than colored people. They're singling out black people. So, and you may stop there.
And people with disabilities.
And people with disabilities. And but what's interesting is that we're going to go through some examples of some of the things that they did. And then if you're not reading the report in detail, we're going to give you those details. You may want to go get this report. You can get it on the Department of, you can get it on their website. Let me just show you.
You don't have to go to the website. Just go to any news link and they'll link you to it.
Yeah, and they'll link you to it. But the name of the report, as you can see it right here.
Other direction. Just in the middle of the screen.
Right there. Yeah, you can see it right there. Investigation of the Louisville Metro Police Department and Louisville Metro government. And so this report concentrated on not only Louisville Metro Police Department, but it also concentrated on and focused on Louisville Metro government, because the police department can only operate as far as the government that controls it allows. And so they talked about the oversight, which, Paul, you and I have talked about this, and I will tell you, why aren't we doing these types of police? Why aren't we suing the police? It seems like there's so much money in these incidences.
Police are getting sued. There's in the report, they talk about how much the city paid out I don't want to mischaracterize. I've read a lot of this. I think it was 40 million. I could be wrong, but there's a number in here where they report how much the city paid out, for violations. So people are getting paid for the violations. It's just that the bigger issue that I have is, I guess, if your house is raided and they don't find anything, you don't show up in the court system, nothing happens, no harm, no foul, apparently so. But the Justice Department seems to indicate that this too is a violation of your rights, that if they went into your house and raided your house with illegal search warrants, which they say are a lot of the search warrants are illegal, and not for reasons that we've already discussed in the Breonna Taylor case, but they say these search warrants are legal from the outset when probable cause is sought. On the basis of the affidavit, they say the affidavits are insufficient. They should have never been, I don't think they go as far as to say they should have never been granted, but they're calling the search warrants invalid based on the affidavit. They're kind of attacking the person who signed the search warrant, which would be the judge, by saying that these are invalid. Right. It's almost like an attack on that they shouldn't have been signed. And they don't state which ones that they're talking about, whether or not these warrants were challenged successfully in court and thrown out by, say, a private lawyer or PD. But they do talk about that a lot of these warrants that they're reviewing, and they grabbed, I think, about 2,000 cases, and they reviewed them as a sample, and this is what they found on a random survey of cases. And so we're going to highlight some of the reasons why the warrants are invalid, and it may help people out there when it comes to dealing with a search warrant or an issue of that way.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I guess one of the things that I want to say is that if you have ever, I don't know why the system is not, okay, there we go. If you have ever encountered the police, not that you're anticipating that you would encounter the police again, you may want to take a look at this report. You may want to go and you don't have to download the whole 90 pages, but you may want to just go look at it.
I think everybody, whether you are going to anticipate encountering police or not, everybody needs to know what they found about LMPD, because it's a common misconception that, whether people are going to admit to this or cops or not, it's a common misconception that police generally don't do very much wrong. And this report says institutionally they're doing a lot of things wrong.
And apparently Louisville Metro government is doing a lot of things wrong, because obviously it's one thing not to train, but then it's another thing to do some training and have absolutely no oversight.
All right, so let's get into
some of the instances. Yeah. Let's talk about the dogs.
So
which one do you want to talk about?
Well, I wanted to go chronologically so that we can kind of briefly explain what they say.
Okay, so you tell me which one you want to talk about.
So the first thing they say is that it's obvious that Louisville Police Department, LMPD, uses excessive force in many of their cases. So they took a survey of 2,217 cases that had less than lethal force. And out of this study, what they determine is that the force routinely...
What page are you on?
I'm on page 12. The force routinely used is disproportionate to the threat involved. So they routinely use force in excess of the threat that they are faced with is what this report is showing. Not every single case, obviously, but they're saying that in general, they found that the officers routinely used force disproportionate to the threat or resistance posed. Officers used force simply because people do not immediately follow their orders. Now, we have heard of these people telling us this. All I did was ask him why, and they grabbed me. They pulled me, yanked me up out of the car. And so even when the people are not physically resisting the officers, that they're using force, applying force to people simply because they're not following their commands.
Taser,
that is an excessive use of force, according to the DOJ.
Yeah, and on that page that you're on, it talks about the tasers, 484, number of reported incidents, 484. And by the way, this report also found that there were a lot of incidents that were unreported and not fully documented. But 71 K9 bites within that period. Now, I think it was from 2013 to 2020, 2016 to 2021. Tasers, 484 incidents. Canine bites, 71. Baton uses, 42. OC spray, 101. Projectile launchers, 34. And takedown and strikes, 1,997. But let's talk a little bit about, Paul, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about excessive force, right? Let's look at some of the examples of excessive force. This is a case right here. This is just one of the cases, okay? And they give this example, and we put it on the screen for you all to read as one example from the hundreds of incidents that we reviewed. An officer encountered an intoxicated white woman screaming and crying while sitting in her friend's lawn. After 90 seconds of standing back and doing nothing, the officer rushed up to the crying woman as she fought with her hands, with her friends, and used his boot to push her torso to the ground. The woman continued wailing as the officer stood over her and held her down with his foot while saying, "I've had enough of you, okay?" As the officer pressed his foot into her chest, the woman tried to bite the outside of his shoe. This threw the officer into a frenzy, and he struck the woman's face over and over again with his flashlight. Can you imagine? He later called his supervisor to report the incident and explained what happened, admitting that he, quote, beat the shit out of the woman as soon as she put her mouth on me, close quote. He said that he did not even know how many times he hit her in the face. The officer could not have reasonably feared, according to the report, for his safety. He was a tall, heavier set man standing over an unarmed 5-foot woman who weighed 110 pounds.
And not only that, but that woman bit him on his shoe. So he was not threatened by a bite to your basis to use force against her. Are we still on?
I don't know why we went to that commercial. But anyway, but yeah. So say that again. Say what you said again, because I think we missed that.
So he was not threatened further because, according to the report, she bit him on his shoe. So nobody's going to feel any pain from getting bit on their shoe by somebody. I mean, officers aren't wearing soft canvas shoes. They're wearing probably some kind of hard leather boots or, flats.
Right. Here's another example, Paul. Here's another example. The officer continued to yell at, I think it's the same one. She continued to yell at the woman to get up after he handcuffed her. He held the woman's handcuffed arms behind her back and above her head. I actually think this is a different incident. As she sat launched over on the pavement. Then he yanked her up by her arms and dragged her into his patrol car. The officer positioned the woman laying on her stomach across the back seat with her arms handcuffed behind her for over 3 minutes. His actions created a serious risk, according to the report in the Department of Justice, that the woman would be unable to breathe, a condition called positional asphyxia, about which officers receive guidance and training because of the risk of death or serious injury. Despite using clearly excessive force, the officer, you ready for this, Paul? Faced absolutely no discipline whatsoever.
And that's a perfect segue into their further finding, even in this excessive force portion on page 19, that the weak oversight by LMPD officers' superiors is what allows this conduct to continue. For instance, a supervisor or I don't know the name of the title of the person who shows up, but the task force commits a violent crime using excessive force. Someone from the police station who's supposed to have the oversight, a sergeant or a supervising officer, comes down and he's supposed to do a full investigation. Well, they don't do a full investigation. According to his report, many times they just ask the officer what happened, and that's the end of their investigation, and they find no problems. They don't ask detailed questions. They don't get enough independent information, according to this report, to make legitimate oversight contribution.
Right. And speaking of, the lack of oversight, let's look at this example. This one says LMPD employs police dogs against people who pose no threat and allows dogs to continue biting people after they surrender. So these are some of the details that you may have missed if you just only got the summary that was put out by the networks. And in this particular one, 2 incidents, the report says, encapsulate the problems we observed. In the first, an officer sent his dog into a basement to search for a white man who was hiding from officers trying to arrest him for a probation violation. The dog signaled to the officer the presence of the man near a couch. The officer flipped the sofa over as he ordered the dog to bite the man, who was found lying face down on his back in his boxers with his hands up. The man stayed on the ground, kept his hands where the officer could see them, and tried to comply with the officer's orders while the dog bit him. The officer allowed his dog to continue biting the man's foot for 20 seconds. The officer finally commanded the dog to release, but the dog continued to bite the man for 25 more seconds. The man suffered puncture wounds on his foot, with emergency medical service thought was broken due to the bite. Your thoughts on that, Paul?
Well, I mean, again, the excessive force is not limited to the officer's physical altercation, but they're letting the dogs loose on people, and there's an even more. I don't know if you have this caption, but there's an even worse dog incident where he lets the dog loose on a 14-year-old.
On a 14-year-old, here you go.
And then people know about this one, but
yeah, so
this one's terrible.
Yeah, in the second incident, an Lmpd officer ordered his dog to bite a black 14-year-old, even though he was not resisting. The officer was leading his dog to search for a person suspected of a home invasion. After searching for several minutes, the officer saw the teenager lying on the ground, face down in the grass. Immediately after noticing the teen, the officer deployed his dog off leash without giving any warning and ordered the dog to bite the teen at least 7 times. Despite the teen staying prone and pleading, okay, help. Get the dog, please. Officer stood over him, shouting orders for nearly 30 seconds while the dog gnawed on his arms. Officers, and according to the report, these officers failed to recognize that the teen could not comply with their commands, given the dog's hold on his arm. At one point, an officer shouted, "Stop fighting my dog," despite video showing the teen lying still with one arm behind his back and the other arm in the dog's mouth. The 14-year-old suffered serious injuries on his arm and back from the bites and had to go to a children's hospital, Paul, for treatment.
14.
Your thought?
I mean, again, we're here to inform you of what this report says, but if you got time, it's 90 pages. It's a long read, but it's worth it. If you want to know everything that you thought was going on, many of us are going to read this and say this is nothing new, but this is an official report issued by the United States government confirming everything that people thought was true. And as a defense attorney, I see things in here that's going to help me in my practice. Frankly, everybody has a little bit of blame here. I've never had one of these big cases, but now I'm going to be on the lookout, and I'm going to question officers more than I had before about some of the things that I'm seeing here. But they all base it off weak oversight, and oversight is not limited to the police superiors. I mean, they kind of hint at prosecutors not prosecuting, and they actually say the court system, so they must be talking about judges. But again, the judges are part of the defense team for the citizens. They are, they're the part of the defense team. If the officers are doing things that are, if according to this report, patently illegal, and they're getting it past a judge, it's the judge's responsibility to protect the citizens as well as the victims or the police. Right? The judge should be calling balls and strikes, and according to this report, they may not be.
Right. They may not be, and I want to talk about accountability at some point.
And that also needs to be fleshed out, because what they found is this. You remember the part where they talked about how many judges have the ability to review search warrants, but this report found that the officers are going to a handful out of 30. They're picking and choosing a handful to get these search warrants signed. That needs to be known. And if you're a judge who finds yourself signing more warrants than others, you need to question why everybody's coming to you to sign these warrants. And you need to.
Right, 6 out of 30.
6 out of 30 judges sign the most warrants.
Only 6 judges are signing them. So, what is the value of this report to the judiciary here locally?
Well, I mean, if you are on notice that if you're just signing warrants, that they may be putting some wool over your eyes. And it's a judge's responsibility to follow the law, number one, but you may be the last line of defense for an illegal search.
I mean, I think this report, Paul, is
vigilant.
required reading for all the new judges. Remember, we had a huge turnover of judges this last election cycle coming into 2023. In January 2023, a number of judges in the district court, court of appeals, circuit court, all took the bench. I think this is required reading.
So on page 22, we start with the Fourth Amendment search violations. And what it says is LMPD search warrant applications frequently lack specifics and details necessary to establish probable cause, except for the fact that these warrants are getting signed. So what they're really, this is an attack on the judiciary where they say that you have a search warrant that a judge has signed, but they're going back and looking at them and they're saying, no, these warrants lack specifics and details that would normally be required for a search warrant to be executed, yet they're getting signed.
Right.
So if I'm a judge, I'm looking at that and I'm reading this and I'm going to be more vigilant.
As a judge.
Yeah.
As a judge. Let me, before we get too far into this, we just have one more example of the officers' excessive force and violation of constitutional rights, mainly against black folks here in Louisville. And this is another example, Paul. This is an example about how LMPD officers, according to the report, unnecessarily escalate encounters leading to excessive force. And here's an example. The officers responded to a domestic violence call in which a black man was in an apartment reportedly armed with a knife. Uh-huh. 2 of the 3 responding officers drove onto the scene as the man walked out with a saw in his hand. Instead of creating distance and taking cover, the officers rushed out of their cars and ran towards the man, ordering him to, quote, drop it. Officers shot the man 13 times within 2 seconds of giving the commands, killing him. Right?
I mean, the report is rife with examples of excessive force, but it's not that it's excessive force because they pulled a gun and shot this gentleman. 2 seconds is his warning time. And they're saying clearly there's something wrong when you don't give enough notice or warning or try to de-escalate the situation. Right. It's all through the report. And
it's all through the report. Yeah, before you go any further, because I want to comment on, here's another one. Unnecessarily escalating. In another incident, officers were responding to a domestic violence call reporting a fight and the suspect had a knife. Mm-hmm. When they arrived, no fight was occurring. Instead, they encountered a black man and a white woman walking away from each other on the sidewalk in front of their home, where their 5 children were inside. Mm-hmm. Officers made no attempt to investigate what had happened, but rather walked up to the man and immediately told him, quote, put your hands up in the air, close quote. The man, whose hands were visibly empty, calmly asked why. Officers did not answer him, even though our law enforcement expert, this is the Justice Department's law enforcement expert, noted that appropriate de-escalation would have involved approaching the man calmly and explaining why he was being stopped. Instead, officers grabbed the man and continued pulling at him. Officers eventually took the man to the ground and tased him 3 times. They gave no warning before deploying the taser and gave the man no opportunity to comply in between the tasings. The second and third tasings occurred as the man laid on his stomach while screaming, I'm done, please stop. Officers handcuffed the man and left him lying on the ground while his kids cried out, is he dead? Is my daddy dead? Officers not only failed to de-escalate, but in fact, escalated the encounter by grabbing the man within seconds of arriving on the scene. Right. Indeed, the man told officers, I would have complied if you said, hey, step on the steps and let me talk to you. Right. Their unsound tactics, according to the Department of Justice, resulted in at least 2 unreasonable tasings and traumatized the 5 young children who witnessed the incident.
Right. So,
wow.
So LMPD is in this report is giving me the impression that they are act first, question later. We've as defense attorneys have talked about this, have gamed this out for years. Again, this is not something that is shocking or new to people who have heard these stories from clients. But it is an official report that exposes them, and it's less of a rumor. It's less of a boogeyman. It's reality now because it's been found by a government institution who's putting it all out there. See, the difference is that when you make a complaint against LMPD knows what your complaint is. You know what your complaint is. You can tell as many other people what your complaint is. What you don't know is what everybody else's complaint is, and they're not sharing that information with the public in general, who can put all that together and form a comprehensive idea of what's going on in LMPD, which is, it sounds like a culture of, I guess, a bully mentality. I don't know how to express it, but if you have officers, and maybe we've all said it before, you got a bad officer who makes the rest of them look bad. However, if you are a good officer, and there's should be plenty of you out there, and you allow the bad officers to put you in a bad light, get rid of the bad officers. Clean house. Quit coming out, and I'm not saying, I don't know who would be responsible for this, but if you're a supervisor, don't come out and act like there's nothing to see here, and let him get off with a slap on the hand and keep it from the public's eye. This exposure is what's going to help, and I hope it does, clean up policing.
Right. Is this, in this report, are we hearing something we just saw in Memphis, Tennessee?
Yes. Yes. You're hearing about, we hear the news stories where somebody dies or the kid gets bit by the dog. We hear those. But they investigated 2,000 cases, and they're finding that a large number of them have the same, illegalities, but maybe not as high a damage. Well, to me, if you have something that's going on that's an illegal search, and it's swept on the rug because the damage is not very high, all you're doing is paving the way for another case down the road where the damage is going to be very high. And so at some point, you got to hold people accountable even for the smallest things.
Right. And you know what was really, really, in my opinion, really, really damning in this report, Paul, was the search and seizure part.
Mm-hmm.
And how the police officers in LMPD just simply were too ignorant to understand the difference between a Terry stop and a pat down.
Right.
Terry stop, pat down, and a search. And in one instance in the report, you may recall, they actually talked about an officer who approached a man, and this was on camera, who approached a man in the park and asked him some questions, and he says, "Well, why are you asking me these questions?" Or something to that effect.
Going to arrest mode.
Right. Or something to that effect. But what he did was he started patting the individual down, and he said, "You can't search me." He said, "I'm not searching you. It's a pat down. Those are two legally different things." And that was so embarrassing because it was patently wrong under the law.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The officer just clearly did not understand the difference between an actual Fourth Amendment search and what we understand to be a Terry pat down. And maybe you can explain to them what a Terry pat down is, because it's a real simple procedure by police officers, right?
So the officer can pat down and feel the outer perimeters of your body if he believes that you have weapons. So
right.
And
Terry was specifically about a weapon.
And so if he feels something that gives him probable cause to believe that he's feeling something else that's illegal, he can search it further. But his initial pat down should be for his protection for weapons.
Right.
They should not be walking up to you saying, "I believe you have drugs. I'm going to pat you down for drugs." That's
but the question is, before the approach, does there not have to be some reasonable suspicion
that a crime is
individual
afoot?
May have? Because when police stop you, the first thing they say is, "Do you have any firearms in the car?"
Right.
And
if you say no, they got to form an independent basis to believe that you do.
Right. I just think. But anyway, let's talk about vehicle searches, Paul. This graphic that's up, it talks about.
So this section right here with this graphic is actually in a section where the report details the police officers' interaction with black people compared to interaction with white people. And we have all said and made jokes. You see him Chris Rock, Dave Chappelle, whoever makes jokes about how black people are treated differently than white people when it comes to interaction with police. This report pretty much supports that position from a government investigative perspective, not just anecdotally, but with statistics. So that's what this is about. It talks about drivers who are black versus drivers who are white, who are stopped by police officers and who are cited or charged with a crime for the same or similar circumstances.
And this particular graphic, right? It says vehicle searches during the stops by race, according to race. Let me bring that down some. According to race, between 2016 and 2021,
black people's drivers were searched more often than white drivers.
Right. Vehicle searches during traffic stops were 6.7 for every 1,000 stop. I think that's what that means. Annual searches per 1,000 residents. And then only 2.5 for whites. So it's almost 3 times.
So basically, if you're a black person and you are stopped by the police for a routine traffic stop, you are approximately a little more than double your chances of getting your car searched.
Right.
Which is awful. Which it shouldn't be that way, because it should be about the same. But then if you couple that high percentage of black people getting searched with the fact that I think they report that black people are 24% of the population, it's in there, whatever the percentage are, that makes it worse.
We'll look at this.
You got a
here.
lower percentage of the population getting searched more often.
Traffic citations for minor violations by race between 2016 and 2021. Black drivers were literally twice as likely to get
a
citation for minor offenses between that time frame than white drivers are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what was even more compelling, Paul, was this idea. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Was the ideal of marijuana?
Again, it's all the fascinating thing about this report. It's all the things that we talked about that we not just suspected were true, but anecdotally knew to be true, and it's pretty much proof. So when you get to the marijuana use by black people is roughly 22.8% of the population according to the national statistics, and for black people, and about 20% for white people. So for the most part, black people and white people, despite what you see on TV, despite the stereotypes, smoke marijuana at about the same rate. But black people are charged with possession of marijuana at 3 times the rate. So figure that math out. They smoke at about the same rate, but they're charged at 3 times the rate. And that was the finding. And, these are for minor traffic stops where people have marijuana. And I don't know if I have to reread this report, and I don't know if they're saying that the white population is just not being charged, or that they actually, don't find marijuana. I'm not sure about that, but this report goes out of its way to say that there's a disparate number of black people being charged with marijuana, despite the marijuana use in the population being nearly the same.
All right, and this was another graphic that we thought was sort of astounding in the report. The ratio of stops reported to dispatch, versus documented stops by racial composition of neighborhoods, 2016 and 2021. Now,
So
for somebody like you who live out in the East End, for somebody like me who live downtown.
I mean, it's no secret that the police patrol the predominantly black neighborhoods the most. We all knew this.
Yeah, but what's wrong with that? Or what's right with that?
So if I were a cop, and I'm playing devil's advocate, and I don't agree with this, but if I were a cop, I'm going to say, well, all the crime happens in the black neighborhood. I think crime happens everywhere. And I think when you put police in a location, they're going to catch more crime happening in the location that they are. So if you police a black neighborhood more than you police another neighborhood, you're going to catch more crimes in that neighborhood. So it's a circular argument to say that all the crimes are happening here and they're not happening elsewhere when you're not patrolling those areas. But it's strange that they show a map of Louisville and where the predominantly black neighborhoods are, and it's no surprise that they're mostly in the West End. So when you look at this graph and you say, okay, in October of 2018, it was at its highest peak, where it's nearly 4-to-1 or greater, 5-to-1, for the number of stops or police intervention in black neighborhoods to white neighborhoods. So that means if you lived in a black neighborhood, you had 5 times more likely to get stopped by a police officer than somebody living in a white neighborhood. Now, we all knew that to be true. We all know it anecdotally, but again, this is an official report stating the obvious, and they can no longer hide behind, well, that's just what you say. There's been no study on it. They can't say that. It's now been a study on it. It's now proven true, and the issue is, what are we going to do about it?
Right. And well, this is what if you see the graphic there, this is a graphic that says LMPD fails to act. Let's see if we can get that a little bit bigger. Fails to act in response to repeated warnings of discriminatory policing. And it takes you all the way from 2014. The LMPD report on 2013 stops. Black drivers more likely to be stopped and searched. This is between 214 and 214. Viper unit rebranded as the 9th Mobile Division. 2016 report on 2014 stops. Black drivers more likely to be stopped and searched. And on and on, on and on. If you look at that, I mean, it just goes on, and nothing has really changed. So here's my question to you, Paul.
And it also says in the report that LMPD has known about these racial disparities for when they did their own study from 2000 to 2008. They knew about it.
Right. And it just continues to talk about it. So here's my question to you. Let's just put on the spot some people that probably ought to be on the spot. Because I said earlier that, we can put LMPD in a vacuum. Okay? And I'm going to say something that probably people don't agree with. Hindsight is 2020. And I know in this report, the Department of Justice talked about, this is not a 2020 hindsight type of thing, but hindsight is really 2020. I mean, but bad acts are bad acts and good acts are good acts. And good policing is good policing and bad policing is bad policing. So 2020 hindsight, et cetera, et cetera. But here's my question to you. LMPD doesn't operate as the government of this city. There are a lot of checks and balances in our legal system, right? Police investigate the cases. They bring the cases to prosecutors. The prosecutors are supposed to be that oversight before it is presented to the judiciary. And then, of course, with search warrants, you go through the prosecutor or the judiciary. So why are we picking on LMPD, I guess is the question.
I mean, they're the ones who are interacting with the community.
Right, but they're the ones who are interacting with the community. But I guess my concern is that, do we have judges who are rubber stamping what the police officers are doing? And that's why the problem has gotten so bad for so long?
So I've said this, and I'm kind of feeling what you're saying. It doesn't have to just be limited to a criminal situation. We need to keep electing judges who understand that their role in government is just as important as the executive branch, meaning the police officers. And it's not limited to criminal cases. I mean, CPS is an arm of the government, and you don't want a judge who's just going to rubber stamp everything CPS says in a family court setting. You don't want a judge who's going to rubber stamp everything Michael Connell and the Commonwealth Attorney says. Because if you do that, if judges rubber stamp everything that the government branch says for whatever reason, whether they fear they'll get, challenged,
right?
Whether they fear that it's not politically correct, their job is to be a check on that executive branch. That's
right, but that's the problem.
Michael Connell's, that's the CPS, that's the police department. It's your job to check that agency. And if you rubber stamp everything they say because it's easy, then the police, even in this situation, they knew what judges to go to get their warrants signed, which leads to all these problems. I mean, we had a judge in Division 5, very good judge. Everybody loved her, but in the Breonna Taylor case, she got the bad rap for signing the bad warrants, and she lost to a good candidate, Tracy Davis.
Right. So I guess my question to you is that then why isn't the Justice Department talking about the judiciary as well? because
they didn't investigate. They didn't
No,
investigate.
I understand they didn't investigate it, Paul. But I guess my question is that yeah, they didn't investigate them.
But that's why you're asking why didn't they talk about them? Because this is the government, and this is the Department of Justice. Their investigation of LMPD. They mentioned other people.
Metro Police Department.
Yeah, they mentioned other people who might have. It's in the report I highlighted somewhere where they mentioned other agencies that might have contributed to it, but their investigation is for the police department. I'm gonna find this section while you're talking.
I get it. That
talk about other people.
That the report and the investigation was focused more on Louisville Metro Police Department, but at some point, as I indicated earlier, at some point you just can't single out LMPD as if LMPD runs the city, right? Because at some point, it's just like a child, right? If somebody complains about the child throwing rocks, at some point somebody's going to look at the parents and say, "What's
Why
going
is your child
on?"
throwing rocks? Right?
So I guess my question, and I understand what you're saying, is that the investigation was focused on the conduct of LMPD, but I'm not sure if during the course of the investigation that this investigation should have not catapulted itself to some other areas, because obviously, again, if y'all understand the process is very clear, right? The police are the investigators. The investigators, y'all have heard this on the law at the beginning of Law and Order for many years. Police are the investigators. They bring their case to the prosecutor. The prosecutors oversight it. The prosecutors act as an overseer, and they determine after application of the law whether there are grounds to move forward with a particular charge. And you can't be sleeping with the police as a prosecutor. You can't be, and I don't mean literally, but you can't be so friended with the police department that you lose the ability to exercise the oversight that the law gives you as a prosecutor. So you have that layer. Then you have the layer of the judiciary. And it just seems that, it's easy to do this report and pick on LMPD, but there's a lot of blame. And I think what this report did, it's focused on LMPD and it focused on Metro government, right?
Exactly. So, I don't know how to add to that because you said it all, but somewhere in this report it does specifically address people who assist, but it's like a paragraph and nothing more. But it does specifically go after, or at least mention, I know it mentions the prosecutors, it mentions supervisors, and it says the court system, and that's as close as they get to saying.
Yeah, it didn't say enough. It didn't say enough because I don't know how we just say that LMPD is discriminating against black folks and then just leave it there, when LMPD takes an investigation to court. And if the investigation is a bad investigation, if a prosecutor sees something that he or she should not prosecute, then they ought to act upon that and not be so cowardly and say, okay, you said he did it. This is what you saw. Because we all have this measuring stick that we call evidence that has to be applied in the courts. And Paul, let me just say this. There's a difference between an aggressive prosecutor, which I was, when you have a case that is well put together, and a prosecutor who is aggressive on just a horrible case, a case that is just not well put together, but is determined to move forward. Because most of y'all don't know, but I've said this on this show over the last 5 or 6 years, the real power in the courtroom is the prosecutors. But the judges have the ability to refuse to put their signature and their rubber stamp on a lot of these cases, right? And a lot of this conduct. But they do.
So, and again, this investigation is mostly directed towards LMPD and the oversight that LMPD provides. Like I said, there's a brief mention to all the things you allude to, but it talks about specifically in the last portion of this report, I guess it starts at page 40. It's at the end of this. It talks about the things that LMPD has to do first it points out all the things that they don't do to supervise their officers, and then the last 9 pages talks about what they need to do to make changes. So if you want to briefly go over the changes, I know we're running out of time, but that's fine. But some of the things that they say.
What page did you say that was on?
Oh, it starts. It's the very last section. I should use the key at the front, but I read this, and it's like I said, it's 90 pages. It's a long read.
It is a long read, but it's a long good read.
So it starts at 73. It says deficient supervision and accountability contribute to LMPD's legal violations.
I think the Justice Department was just bailing some people out when they said that.
Well, maybe so.
I mean, well, let me get to this, Paul, before we run out of time. Let's talk about the agreement. So you know that the Justice Department entered into an agreement, right?
Yes.
So I want everybody to hear this very clearly. The Attorney General of the United States visited and came here to Louisville, have this big press conference. He brought 2 of his most prized attorneys. One I think is a black female. The other one I think might be a black female, but she's ethnic. She's non-white. But he brings them here. They run the Civil Rights Division, and they're very, very aggressive about what they're doing in Washington and across this country in terms of handling these types of incidences and conduct. But here's the problem. They do this big press conference, Paul, and this report just goes everywhere, right? I read about it on The Guardian, which I think is a newspaper over in England. I read about it. I saw it on the CBS Morning News. I saw it on Good Morning America. I saw it, and I see it all over, and it's been on the news and the local news all just ad nauseum. Here's the issue I have now. When we ask the question, right? I mean, let's all ask the question: what are you going to do, right? This applause is going off. I don't know why. But when you ask the question, what are you going to do? What have you decided to do about all of this? And so that gets us to this agreement that they entered into. Because what's really interesting about this, Paul, is this agreement. And I find it very, very interesting that they're not going to sue the city of Louisville. They're not going to ask for some huge accountability. That's right. And I noticed, the signatures on there, right? Mike O'Connell, Craig Greenberg, but the mayor, and then some U.S. attorneys. But, the Attorney General himself is not on there. But interesting enough, is I want to talk about the agreement. Let's look at this agreement. This is what they said, what's on the screen. And I want y'all to follow along with this. It's very interesting. So what are they doing about it? Now you've got this 90-page report. You had this big press conference. Going forward, the parties commit, that is Louisville Metro, Lmpd.
And who's going to force this?
Now, but listen to this. Going forward, the parties commit to negotiate, not do anything yet, just negotiate in good faith to reach a comprehensive settlement in the form of a consent decree to be entered as an order of the United States District Court for the Western District of Kentucky. Now, let me pause there and tell everybody that that's how forced busing occurred here in Louisville, Kentucky, because they had to get a consent decree from the federal court, the Western District of Kentucky. It goes on to say that an independent third-party monitor will be selected to assist in determining whether the settlement is being implemented and whether the goals of the settlement have been achieved. The settlement will specify the selection and appointment process for the independent monitor. The chief of Lmpd, who is answerable to the mayor of Louisville Metro, will retain full authority to run Lmpd in accordance with the law. Now, let me tell you why they say that. They said that because the Justice Department has the authority to actually change that or force the change of that. It further says this agreement in principle does not limit, check this out, Paul, expand or create a right of any person or entity seeking relief or pursuing legal action against Louisville Metro and all of that. No personal entity. Okay. And I'm not sure if that So it says the United States agrees to defer filing a lawsuit against Louisville Metro related to its findings while the parties engage in good faith negotiations to reach, right? To reach
Now, Carl, they're not talking about a monetary settlement.
a settlement. No, they're not talking about monetary. So they're not talking about anything. What they're saying is that, listen, here's what happened. We found all of these bad things about Louisville Metro Police Department and Louisville Metro government as it pertains to policing black folks. But we're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to let everybody know that Lmpd has put some things in place, and so now it's going, and we're going to see how that goes. And what's going to happen 5 years later?
Right.
We're going to be in the statistics are not going to change. So I wonder, while all of the pomp and circumstances that surrounded this report, I really wonder
wait a minute.
what the hell is going to happen.
I got to disagree with you a little bit on there. I think that this agreement, coupled with the last few pages where they recommend what Louisville should do, is they're looking.
It's a recommendation, Paul.
Right, but they're looking.
It has no bite. It
right,
doesn't have the same bite that those dogs had on that 14-year-old black boy.
So you were a prosecutor, Carl, and you know that this agreement is saying we're going to give you a chance to fix the situation, or we'll withhold.
This went back to 2016, Paul. And I'm just debating with you. I know you're just reporting the report,
right,
but I'm just saying that
this yesterday,
right? But their investigation looked at information and processes and conduct back to 2016.
Right.
So now in 2023, you're going to say, let's try something new. Come on, man. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, but in the last, I just want you to know that they gave them 36 recommendations.
Recommendations.
Well, this is what it says.
Recommendations. No recommendation is that anybody gets fired.
It says, we commend Louisville Metro government and Lmpd for not waiting for the outcome of this investigation to make improvements. But they must do more to address the legal violations and the root causes of the violations identified in this report. Keep going. It says, the recommended remedial measures below provide a starting framework for changes.
We'll check back in 30 days to see how you're going. Okay. We'll check back in 5 years to see how it's going. By that time, you probably have, 4 or 5 other people killed.
So read some of these
police violence, possibly.
But if you read some of these recommendations, pressure doesn't have to be put on by just the Justice Department. The citizens can put on. If they all read these, a lot of these people will say that makes common sense, and you put the pressure on your local officials to enforce these.
Yeah, but Paul,
it all starts with us as citizens enforcing our rights. For instance, out on the streets.
So you got to read this.
Out on the streets.
You got to get a copy of it. You got to read it.
When the officer comes up to you and wants to arrest you for simply not following his instructions, if you don't go to court and enforce your free speech right and challenge him on his arrest or his stop.
First, make sure he has his video. He or she has their video on.
It gets swept under the rug. Right. And so what I'm telling you is the same pressure that you apply on a police officer when you say to him, I'm just expressing my rights. Why am I being stopped? And he wants to get jazzy with you and say, I'm a police officer. I can do whatever I want. Get out of the car. You have the right to say, why are you telling me to get out of the car? Okay. And then he's going to get violent and maybe have a lawsuit. But you can put the same pressure on your local leaders. There's 36 recommendations.
Yeah, we need police. We cannot live in this society today without police. We absolutely can't do it. And don't be misunderstood by what we're talking about tonight. There are some fine men and women in blue, not only in Lmpd, but everywhere. But I will say this to the Department of Justice. This is a wonderful 90-page report. You come here and you take a few incidences and you did do 20/20 hindsight. I get all of that. But my question is that if you found this to be so bad, why are you leaving recommendations with a city and a police department who has been given recommendations? Actually, in that report, Paul, if you recall, it talks about how many times and how many opportunities that Lmpd has actually put into place measures to curb discriminatory searches, discriminatory vehicle stops. And then here we are in 23, and the reports are still saying the same. The stats don't look any different. And of course, I'm not convinced, having all my years as a prosecutor, I'm not convinced that black people commit crime, young black boys, young black men commit crimes just because they're black. I'm not convinced of that. And it's just like you said earlier, Paul, if you concentrate your force, your police force in one particular area where there's only one particular race, it likely is to result that most of your arrests are going to be of that particular race. That's the problem we had with the Kentucky Derby and Broadway. They assigned a lot of police officers to West Broadway during Kentucky Derby weekend, recognizing that everybody was probably publicly drunk, had possession of marijuana. Not everybody, but most people coming in the city had publicly drunk, had possession of marijuana and all of that. But if not 80% of your officers, and I'm exaggerating, it was 8, but if 80% of your officers are on West Broadway, where there's 99% of the individuals cruising up Broadway are black people, then your arrests for that particular weekend are going to be, it's going to be high. So all I'm saying, the point I'm making is very simple. How do you come here, give us a report that is this scathing, and walk away and say, well, we're negotiating. Well, we've agreed to do this, and we're going to do all this in good faith. These people have had many, many years to do a lot of shit in good faith, and it hasn't been done.
Carl, but in playing devil's advocate, the mayor just took office. So, he can't go back and undo what anybody else has done. And so this agreement...
Hold on, Paul.
This agreement is
Let me just interject this. The same mayor that said on the 5th day of the year that the killing is going to stop. And then for the next 7 or 8 days of this year, we had a killing
right, but
every day.
I mean, nobody believed the killing was going to stop. Okay?
Right.
No, you can't stop killing.
So why did he say it?
He felt like
political shit, right?
Well, he's probably a person like myself who wears his emotions on his sleeves, and at that moment, this shit needs to stop. And he probably believed that, but and many people have said that in their lives, but that don't mean the shit stops. So he wanted it to stop.
I want it to stop. We all want it to stop. I'm just curious, Mayor Greenberg, how you going to do it?
It's not going to stop. I mean, people are going to kill each other.
Why?
Because that's human nature.
It's not human nature.
It
is.
is.
They did in the Wild Wild West, but why do we have to do it in the west side of Louisville?
I mean,
or any other place in this city. It's not just in the West.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying you can't have. You're not gonna have. I would love to live in a world where killings didn't happen, but it's people. Yeah. It's like saying people aren't gonna get angry at each other. It's gonna happen. Anyway,
we have maxed out our hour on this show, Paul. I want to say thank you for joining me tonight, and for those of you who have yet to see it, I want you all to take a look at this investigation of the Louisville Metro Police Department and the examples that we talked about. There are some more examples in there, and they're really horrendous. And I think we have an obligation as well, Paul, as lawyers. And, you and I talked about this before we came on the air, and that is that maybe we need to be doing civil rights laws.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a whole lot. I mean, with this type of conduct, there's got to be a lot of money there. But I think more importantly, Paul, we need to do our part as well as lawyers. When we see this stuff, we simply should not be okay with the dismissal just
right.
because the case gets
dismissed. I think this has changed the way I might start looking at cases. And you're right, it doesn't stop. Your case is not going to stop with a dismissal. Like a dismissal, you win, client's happy, but how does that stop this from happening again?
Right.
Because once the dismissal is had, everybody forgets about it and it goes on and happens again.
Right. Well, Paul, thanks for joining me tonight. As you all can see now, maybe you can see. I don't know if we can get over there. But anyway, Paul's right here next to me. Anyway.
Did you freeze?
No, I didn't freeze. I think that the music is playing, so I was just trying to get the music. But anyway, I am Carl Price.
You are listening to Conscious Fever, hosted by Carl Price.
Guest tonight. Give him a round of applause. I know I can't hear it. You can't hear it, Paul. They're cheering for you. Yeah. We'll make that happen to you. But anyway, I hopefully will be back next week. I am sorry that we didn't get to do the comments tonight. There are some technical difficulties. We're not going to deal with them. I'm going to send you right out. I'll see you next week.
I don't want them, no, get them all off me. Say that for L, she a cause, you see. 4 cars deep, we'll come through on the lane. Chicken spot, wings wings and fries. We call that a day night. Lights on, so out. I don't have no stage fright. Knew that I was built for this forever, ever, ever.
You are listening to Conscious Fever, hosted by Carl Price.
We ride bands, 10 times 10. All my friends, it's for real.
I get enough of you. Bright sneakers on, getting ready for a flashback. Time keeps moving on, looking at you, feeling like I could never, get enough of you. And I could never get enough of you. I could never get enough of you.
I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord that I wake again. I wake again. I pray the Lord that I. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord that I wake again. I wake again. I pray the Lord that I wake again.
You are listening to Conscious Fever, hosted by Carl Price on 97thebetfm.com.
I was born by the river in a little tent. Like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. 'Cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it is. Then I go to my brother. And I say, brother, help me please. But he wind up knocking me back down on the knee. Oh, there've been times that I thought I couldn't last for long, but now I think I'm able, Father, to carry on. And it's been a long time coming, but I know it's gonna come. Oh, yes it is. Yes it is. Yes it is.
change is gonna come one day.
I know a change